United Methodist Church that attend part of the congregation at Monterey. A huge thank you to the Pacific Grove United Methodist Church for letting us use their facility and their equipment. So later, after this event, it will be available for viewing for those who might not have been able to attend today. Thank you, Pastor Gail Baston, and thank you to Sharon Erickson, who is doing our technical work, and all the folks that prepared the coffee time. Sharon will upload this after, and the connection, if you want to write this down, is YouTube:FUMC, which stands for First United Methodist Church of Pacific Grove. And that's where it will be found later. The panelists have provided some resources that you may have all seen on the table over here. And if you didn't get to it earlier, I encourage you to look. And there are 2 homework items on there of some legislation that we can support that you might be able to take back to your organizations and to make copies of. Also, if there's anyone that didn't get an evaluation form, can you raise your hand so our registrars can give one to you? And then just in case you didn't hear, the restrooms are around the corner. You go out this door over here. So the format for the remainder of the day will be that I will give a brief overview of some of the overlapping, intersecting issues with housing. I will define low-cost housing and the difference between charity and social justice. Following that, I will introduce our panelists in the order they will speak. Each will have no more than 15 minutes, with remaining time for interaction either between the panelists or between you and the panelists, our audience. Our plan is to end no later than noon, and if questions are all answered prior to that, we can all go home. Great. Our hope for this morning is that the education we will get will lead to advocacy in the community and perhaps beyond. We are all acutely aware there is a housing crisis in our county as we come to today's forum. Just a reminder that low-cost housing is defined as housing that is less expensive than average. This is accomplished through lower building costs. The lower building costs are a result of limits such as size and amenities, location, number of units, and subsidies such as tax credits, grants, regulatory changes, local zoning decisions, and public land contributions. As a result, the resulting housing cost is lower than average. Some of the intersecting issues with low-cost housing are living wage, water availability, transportation, criminal justice, climate, local zoning, cost of health care, and offered services don't meet the individual's needs. Just to list a few. Let us take living wage, for which 1 or 2 people should be $19.34, and for a family of 4, $26.57. At the same time, to be able to spend no more than 30% of household income on housing, a worker in Monterey County would need to earn at least $32.94 an hour. You can all guess. We know that historic patterns of who could live in what areas has affected housing, as does local laws and ordinances, such as zoning, as to how many units can be on how much land. It is key that we understand the difference between charity and social justice. There is a difference between a compassion that affects acts of personal charity and a commitment to social justice that affects change at the institutional, systemic level. Social justice seeks to address the root cause of a problem by advocating for changes in institutions and political structures in order to prevent a problem such as homelessness from occurring. While charity addresses the symptoms or outcomes of the problem by feeding or short-term shelter, social justice advocates for change. Another way this has been said is charity gives and justice changes. Equity is what is sought, as it says the structures or systems of education, politics, economics, healthcare, the church, power, etc., have been created in such a way that discrimination lives within the structures themselves. Equality says everyone already begins from an equal place, with equal access to resources and an equal chance to survive and thrive. And we know that is a myth.
That's right.
Now, if I can briefly introduce our panelists. To my left is Dr. Carol Lynn McKibben, an Organization of American Historians Distinguished Lecturer. She has been teaching courses in California, Urban and Immigration Histories for Stanford's Department of History and Urban Studies since 2006. She is engaged in numerous community-based research projects on the Monterey Peninsula for 30 years, including as director of the Seaside History Project from 2005 to 2012. And next is Kontrena McPheter, a peer outreach and advocacy coordinator from Interim, the only agency in Monterey County that provides services for adults who have serious mental illnesses. And next, we have Matt Huerta, the housing program manager from the Monterey Bay Economic Partnership, a regional nonprofit that advocates for housing, among many other things, as I understand. I know this next guy, but you know. Happens to be my city councilman, Alan Hoffa, and he can speak to barriers to housing as well as possible solutions and how these might come about. And though I've known Alan for years, he got invited to come to this because of a rebuttal he did on neighborhood emails, if you're familiar with, because people were raising so many issues about the homeless, and it was very comprehensive. And then continuing is Deb Shearer, Development Director of Interim, yes. And then Kate Daniels from Senator Laird's office, who is the Policy Advisor on Water and Homelessness, member of the Monterey Planning Commission, a trustee of the Gathering for Women, and not only that, but holds other positions, but has brought us the homework. And they're the two white pages on the right-hand end of the table over there that are two bills that we can work on. Before we hear from the first panelist, I want to point out Brenda Cunningham. And if you'll hold up the signs, please. You'll see she's our timer, so she'll give you 2 minutes and time. And if anybody finishes early, we'll just move to the next speaker, okay?
Sit in the front. Do you have a hammer for the council member?
That's all right.
We're friends.
Yeah, I know. So first we will hear from Dr. McKibben.
Thank you so much. Do I need a mic?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
sorry. Should I remove?
It's easier for you.
Yeah, it probably is. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Michael, for inviting me to this. I think it's a hugely important conversation to be having, especially in the Monterey area. And as an historian and a student of urban studies, I just completed a book on Salinas called Salinas, Race and Resilience in an Agricultural City. A lot of my work, most of my work, concerns inequality and place, and how inequality plays out in towns and cities up and down the state of California. Michael asked me to come to the table with solutions, some policy suggestions, right? And the first policy suggestion I would advocate is to understand how we got here in the first place. We didn't get here by accident. It was always by design, and it was not in a vacuum. It was a confluence of forces that got us here. We can go back to the 17th century. I won't do that. What I will do is go back to 1922, when good old Herbert Hoover, our Secretary of Commerce, put together a public-private partnership to sort out what he considered chaos in urban development from the East Coast to the West Coast. And he came up with the Standard State Zone Enabling Act. That act in 1922 set the foundation for the way cities would now be organized along the lines of zoning. And integral to that act was this ideology of scientific racism, which put people on a hierarchical plane with people who could be defined as white or European origin at the top of the hierarchy, but also to signify that everybody else was part of a contagion in this country and needed to be separated along with industrial areas and commercial areas. So by 1929, by the Great Depression, we had in place this partnership and this policy of zoning that was based on this ideology of scientific racism, agreed upon by the best minds in this country, by everybody from private developers to the federal government, that this was the way we ought to live. And in that ideology and the way zoning was conceptualized, people who lived in apartments, people who were of color, were considered people who needed to be segregated off from white populations. Fast forward to the Great Depression. This is already in place in policy and practice, right? It's already in place. By 1929, by the 1930s, fully a third of homes in this country were in foreclosure. And I always, liken that to today and how shocked we are when a fraction of those homes are. So what does the federal government do? It starts subsidizing mortgages and helping people to stay in their homes, but only if you're white and male. Only if you're white and male. And this flew in the face of evidence, because quantitative evidence proved that if you were an immigrant, if you were poor, if you were working class, if you were anyone of color, you were likelier to pay your mortgage than someone who was white and male and middle class, who thought, oh well, I'll lose this one, but I'll easily be able to get into another home. So you hung on for dear life, right? So the rate of foreclosure was actually higher among white men than it was among women of any race, among Black people, Mexican people, anyone of Asian descent. Those people paid their mortgages. So against evidence, all evidence to the contrary, the federal government stepped in and subsidized housing for people. So we begin to see what's going on in cities in the 30s, that impact in the 30s. And that wealth that was generated by that group of people in the 30s, pre-World War II, was sustained over generations and increased dramatically in places like California when values increased after World War II. By 1949, the federal government decided in the post-war that we really needed public housing. But in order to be financed, by the federal government for public housing, you had to be segregated. You had to be segregated. It wasn't a choice. If you weren't segregated, you didn't get any money. So we saw in federal policy in 1949, the 1949 policy required segregation by race to qualify for federal funding. And we need to let that sink in. That's huge. So if we look around us and wonder why we have very little affordable housing, especially for communities of color, we know why. We know why. It became unfashionable to be explicit about this racism after World War II, when numerous court cases challenged overtly racist policy, right? And won. But this ideology did not go away. It just became more sophisticated and implicit. But it was part of policy. It was reproduced over and over again. We can look at our highway systems to get a glimpse of that. So my work in Seaside, my work in Salinas, starts with separation and racial discrimination. And it is no accident that the need for affordable housing comes most from communities of color, right? And these communities have been separated off. It's no accident that the lack of investment in infrastructure, in apartments, which then became something to be disdained. Part of the Hoover FDR impetus was to encourage single-family homes to be built. That was the American ideal. Everything else became suspect. Renting was suspect. And it was part and parcel of a complicated federal strategy to support the construction industry and the real estate industry. It was a public-private partnership that has never gone away. Challenged though it was, it is still with us, right? So I think that when we understand that at a deep level, we see what we're up against. We can appreciate a little bit better what we're up against. We got this standardization of appraisal system, affordable mortgages for white people, not for anyone else. The Model Cities program, all of it was based on a racist ideology that's what is part of the American way of life. It's cemented. And that makes it even more difficult to overcome, but not impossible. So when we get into how to challenge that, after racism kind of went underground, although I would argue that it's no longer underground, that it's pretty overground right now. That since 1949, but particularly in the 1960s, when Lyndon Johnson began his war on poverty, when we began the Model Cities program, the whole focus of our investment was to remove communities of color from city space, not invest in them, which is why we don't have affordable housing today. We were not investing, for example, in West Oakland. We just defined West Oakland as blighted and moved everybody out of the homes that they so carefully and painfully held onto in the build up to World War II and World War II. And that has created an enormous problem in the America that we look at today. The definition, and I remember in my work in Seaside, the definition of blight that just decimated places. And that's why we don't have the investment that we need in terms of housing. That's why the problem today feels so formidable. It feels formidable because it is formidable. And it was based on decades and decades of policy that were very, very explicitly tied to an ideology of race that marginalized, excluded, demonized people of color, in fact, connected people of color to all sorts of things, to disease, and attributed poverty and undevelopment to the people themselves instead of understanding that zoning laws had everything to do with it. Everything to do with it. So as an example, when we look at those old zoning policies and we see these racially restrictive covenants, we see that in a community of color, for example, in Los Angeles, it was okay to locate an industrial waste plant in the middle of a Mexican majority neighborhood. That was okay. White people of means excluded themselves and ensured that those kinds of developments didn't happen in their neighborhoods. And they were supported at every level by realtors, by the federal government, by local government, by state government. Everybody had an implicit explicit, but then implicit understanding of how this was going to play out. Thank you for the 2-minute warning. I think, I've concluded, and I would welcome your questions. Thank you for having me. I hope this is helpful in terms of understanding the roots of the problem so we can all be depressed and see how formative
Thank you very much. And we will have hopefully plenty of time at the end to have lots of questions. And we do have 3x5 cards. If somebody is concerned they won't remember their question, you're welcome. The people's registration desk will help you with that. Kontrena, we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Could
you hold your microphone a little closer?
A little closer? Okay.
Yeah,
I just want to say I'm happy. I am happy. I am the Peer Outreach and Advocacy Coordinator for Interim Inc. But 15 years ago, I was a homeless, drug-addicted, psychotic woman. Interim has a program by the name of McComb. It's Monterey County Homeless Opportunities Makeup Empowerment. I was found not a few blocks from where I was actually born. I am an Army brat. My father retired from the military, and I was born at the old hospital, not Silas B. Hayes, but they call it D17. And I was abandoned there. The van that I was living out of had been taken, and I was left there. One of the outreach counselors by the name of Jody Gully found me. And at that moment, I did not have the ability to make a choice. I thought I was going to die in that building. It was an old abandoned building. Well, he asked if I would accept his help. And I shook my head yes. At that moment, I had no trust in my mind. I did not trust anything that my mind was telling me, because I looked at the accumulation of my life, and all my life decisions led me to that point where I couldn't trust myself. I had been up for days. The reason I know that acronym so well is because I spent so much time in that hallway where they had a big sign that said Macomb and what it meant and what it was to do. And part of Interim's guidelines and principles are that we're housing, healing, and hope. These social workers, the churches, the women's shelter, all helped me stabilize. I was able to get on medication. I have a diagnosis of bipolar number 2. But they gave me the chance to regain my life. One of the things that they really saw in me was that I had a passion for my peers and for bringing people together. I was able to talk. I was able to share my life experiences, and people connected with that. So it would allow others to be able to share and talk and know that it was a safe place to do that. I didn't know that I was doing cognitive behavioral therapy. I had no idea what that was. And so, as I was coming into being in recovery for a year and being able to make decisions and getting my mind straight and my body and my soul straight, they offered me a job. Did I tell you that my diagnosis is bipolar number 2?
Yeah.
Okay. So that means that I suffer with great depression. The only time that I'm ever manic is when I have lack of sleep or if I'm using drugs. So I have intrusive thoughts. I don't hear voices, but these thoughts are so intense and so vivid that sometimes it takes my breath away, or I have to pull over to the side of the road and get myself together. But when Interim offered me a job, those old thoughts about not being worthy, along with the issues around African Americans taking medications, Western medications, how we were used in the past to test out these medications, how they would react to my mind and my body. But I chose to take these medications as opposed to using street drugs. But it accumulated into me being honest and saying, look, I lack the education that this job requires. Interim says, we will hire you, but you have to get your education. Well, I did it. I went from being on Social Security, disability, to now I make a great, livable wage.
Amen.
I create options for my community. Through my lived experience, I am able to share how I did it, who I did it with, and I'm able to tell my peers that they can do it too. That they have an invested interest in their lives. That they're more than just that diagnosis. My name is Kontrena McPheter. I was born an Army brat. I lived in the community I'm 55, I'll be 56 in November. And for 56 years, that I love to cook. I know how to cook. I used to love to cook. I don't cook anymore. But I'm more than just that diagnosis.
Amen. Amen.
That I am a viable partner in this community. I am a stakeholder. I teach my peers that they can dream again. Interim offered me that opportunity to do that, and I do a good job.
Thank you.
As I walked in this morning, someone asked how I was doing, and I told them I was blessed. And my blessings come in so many different ways. When I help someone get off the streets, or someone needs to come in to our Omni Wellness Center, that is where I work. It is located in Salinas, 339 Pajaro Street. It's called the the Pajaro Wellness Center, but we're the Omni Resource Center that's located inside the Pajaro Wellness Center. It's the old Alliance on Aging building.
Oh, yeah.
The old one that was on Pajaro across from AT&T. Okay. And free of charge. You walk in, you get screened for COVID like everybody else. You know, when you're walking into that type of setting, we have groups. We have groups on laughter, the joy of laughter. We have groups on harnessing hope. We have groups on mind over mood. There goes that cognitive behavioral therapy again. I've learned about dialectical behavior therapy. We learned all those types of coping skills for my peers to be able to achieve. We have a large homeless population that comes into the center. We help them get resources. We get them hooked up with the Gathering for Women and other places to get help. We get them through Macomb. We get them housed. We build housing. We do so much in the community, and I was so blessed that I found Interim. But I'm so blessed that I am able to give back to my community now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Matt?
Hello.
Matt Huerta here has some more interesting information to share with us.
Yes. Thank you, Reverend. Thank you. That was powerful. I was going to sit back down, but I don't want to distract from a single second she was sharing with us. Again, Matt Huerta, resident of Salinas, proud father of 4, and my spouse is a school teacher there in Salinas at LSL High School. And I've been here since 2005 in Monterey County, and very proud to work with various nonprofits here and across the state. So I have a full-time consulting practice dedicated to affordable housing and community development and social justice. And the Monterey Bay Economic Partnership has been my longest-standing client here in the Monterey Bay. And since 2016, I've been their housing program initiative lead. And so I've had the pleasure of helping build out the team and raise some funding and really try to maximize our impact here in the region, the Tri-County region of Monterey County, San Diego County, and Santa Cruz County. Very diverse needs, but also very uniquely aligned in terms of some of our opportunities and challenges, right? You know, many of the same, the air quality concerns, the schools, the transportation, waterways, etc. Many of the largest employers, right, share a lot of infrastructure across the Tri-County area. So Monterey Bay Economic Partnership was founded in 2015 And really around the premise of trying to coordinate and emphasize around action. The major employers across the region taking action on the issues most prevalent to moving our region forward through some of these challenging issues. So kind of take some of the things that the chambers and other major players are doing, but kind of really trying to hone that and focus it in a more strategic way around initiatives. And so when you ask many of the largest employers, what do you care about? What's the issue? How can your business, whether it's ag or education or healthcare, what's on your concern? Housing, housing, housing. I can't, recruit the right folks. The folks, whether you're at the ground level or management level, you cannot sustain housing. You can't find the right kind of housing to meet your family's needs. Whether in Salinas, the median home price currently is $700,000. You're looking at over $2,000 rents for your standard, 2-bedroom. That's increasing. I don't have to tell you on the peninsula, the median home price is well over $1 million, right? So can our students afford that? Can your family afford that? And fortunately, I think what was really helpful that Dr. McKibben brought up earlier was just that this system of extraordinary cost and exclusion and inaccessibility wasn't something done overnight. Much of that is a system that's overlaid on systems that were in place a long time ago. And we are all kind of, working through that together, right? And so I mostly just wanted to share, make sure that you understood what MBEP's role is in this as a partner, as residents, as community leaders, business leaders, civic leaders, and elected official representatives, etc., nonprofit leaders. We're here as a partner. And so there's 3 general lanes that we support the community in. So advocacy around policies and projects that are going to move the needle on housing production. And housing production focused on the biggest needs of the community. And frequently the biggest needs are for the essential workforce that ought to be able to live close to their job.
Amen.
And yet, over 80%, almost 90% of everybody on the peninsula commutes in for work.
Right.
And you all experience that, right? As homeowners and other folks that live here in the community, we see that. So how can we address that? So again, policies and projects at the project level, and we try to, again, addressing institutional and systemic changes that the Reverend mentioned earlier, thoughtfully trying to lock arms with others to find those solutions and move those forward. The second piece is around money, because we need more resources to make deeply subsidized, targeted housing work for our individuals and families that need that. Interim doesn't work for free. They need resources for highly talented people to do the tough lifting, and we need to make sure they're adequately resourced and that they get access to the local, state, and federal resources that it takes to deliver high-quality housing and services to the people that need it the most. And so all that complexity needs more watering, and so we try to find, okay, where is the biggest bang for the buck to do that? Sometimes it's activating private financing, and so we actually partner with the Housing Trust of Silicon Valley, the largest community development finance institution of its kind. Is chartered through the Treasury Department at the national level. And we partner with them to make sure that we get some of that tech money down here. And tech is here in our region, right?
Yes.
Right? Looker and many others and Amazon others are really starting to understand that this is we're part of that mega region that is Silicon Valley, right, to the south. And we're definitely part of that economic watershed. And so making sure that we get some of those dollars and making them work for our community. The third piece is employer-sponsored housing. And employer-sponsored housing means, and because MBEP, I mentioned before, we're a membership-driven organization, over almost 90 members of healthcare, ag, tech, education. If you look at the board, it's kind of the who's who of the Tri-County region, and in terms of the CEOs. And what we're trying to do is say, look, okay, can you dedicate some treasure, talent, or other resources, property maybe, to the cause of housing your employees and improving the ecosystem, right, of housing opportunities. And so examples are even Pebble Beach, right? You know, I know how controversial that was, but that's an example of an employer stepping up. They didn't have to do that, right? And Kennemer and Antle, there's other employers that are stepping up on the ag piece. Just about, there was a large farm worker housing study for Pájaro, which is mostly Watsonville, right? And Salinas Valley. That study came out in 2018. It identified 90,000 unique farm workers just in our region. 90,000. And it also said that there was, on average, overcrowding, on average in Monterey County was about 2.5-ish, persons per household. But for a farm worker household, that's over 7. So it tells you that there's multiple folks living there. Those people, have cars or access to work, all those things. And so it all kind of starts to pile up in terms of these social concerns, right? And so anyhow, employers are now seeing that it's a business imperative for them to help stabilize their workforce, to make sure that they can come healthy and ready to work and productive. Well, it starts with having a safe, stable, and affordable place for them and their families. The other things farm worker study found was that some people, and including myself, had a notion that, well, maybe most of that 90,000 folks are people that come over from Mexico or elsewhere and don't have kids with them. In fact, the study showed that a majority of, almost 70% of farm workers are part of larger families with children. So if you're helping, chances are if you're helping that farm worker, right, help connect the dots, that's directly leading to a healthier opportunity for children. So something to always remember that that's a situation here. So in terms of what we do on a regular basis is around the advocacy piece, especially because that's mostly what you'll probably hear of myself or others in the news. It's like, okay, well, what are they up to now? It's because we're endorsing and supporting in whatever way makes sense those housing policies and projects to move forward. And I'll highlight one recently in the last couple of years. It's still kind of in the news sometimes. is the Garden Road rezone. When I first met with some leaders, even folks that are on our board, they said, "Matt, don't touch it. Go away. Work on something else." Well, if I did that every time someone told me that, over 20 years of doing affordable housing work, I would have not one unit to my name. I have several thousand units that I've actually touched and helped to create over the years across Northern California. Been told no many times. So again, we locked arms with many other folks, including Councilmember Hoffa here and others, and moving that ball forward. It still needs to move forward, but that's an example of where we absolutely are there. And so she's
You're looking at me.
Someone's moving the ball forward. Hot potato. So we're here to support you all the way. So continuing to move that forward. I know we're going to continue to talk some more. The other thing that I wanted to mention, because I know I have just another minute, is the state is very much involved now. They're in the housing business. Federal government used to be in the housing business, as mentioned before, in a kind of diabolical way mostly. And then funding, and then use bad models. Now we're kind of redoing all that stuff in a much more healthy, systematic way, where we know that housing doesn't just come with housing. It comes with access to parks. It means, where you access your faith-based community. It means how you access food and healthy food options. All those things are combined in that housing basket, right? And community basket. Well, the state, again, understands that. They're involved on a money level and a policy level. And they're working to make sure that local governments are trying to meet their regional housing needs. You're going to hear a lot more about that regional housing needs assessments and goals very soon. I encourage you to get involved with that. We're going to help and lead that charge regionally and convening many workshops around that. Visit our website to learn more. We actually have a really good website where it kind of really distills that and helps folks understand and plug in. The other thing is that when folks tell me, Matt, sorry, we have a water issue, we don't have any land, we're built out, that's not necessarily all the way true either. There are definitely opportunities. Even Pacific Grove has recently gone through a process where I identified 12 opportunity sites and then some. There are opportunities to make a difference here in your community, but we need the voices of yes, to show up and support the cause. So I really appreciate it. I look forward to more discussion with everybody here and you. Thank you very much.
I want to take a little something from what you said, Matt. I had the opportunity to be one of a team interviewing the former Senator Bill Monning, whose wife, you may, those of you who know her, are an RN. And one of the issues with the multiple housing is health. And what she discovered with the work that she does, that people were living in the house in shifts. You come home from work, and as you left, you know, somebody else left to go to work. Just think of what that does when we have something like COVID going on. So that's just another reality that exists in our community that might be invisible, but health is definitely another issue that is connected and intersects with housing. All right, Alan, I think it's your turn.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I wanted to begin with, first of all, gratitude and hope and advocacy and persistence, those four things. First of all, gratitude. I'm really grateful for the work that all of the folks on this panel do.
Amen.
And for all of the folks in our community and in our faith community do to try and address these issues. So that's for number one. Number two, hope. It's really easy working on issues like homelessness and housing to feel despair and to feel like we all understand the problem is extremely complex and there's a lot of barriers, and sometimes it feels like despite our best efforts we're not making progress. But we are making progress. We really are. All of the work all of you are doing collectively is making a difference. So I have hope, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Advocacy, Matt spoke to that, and if you're not part of kind of his email list, please sign up for that, because when folks show up to public agency meetings, it makes a difference. And folks who don't want to see anything happen, or folks who see homeless people as criminals, they do show up, and their voices are heard. So we need the voices of people who see other people and feel compassion and want change. We need those voices. And Matt does a really great job of letting the community know when a housing project or something of that nature is on an agenda. So advocacy matters, and persistence. You know, Matt spoke to that as well. Kontrena, I think, speaks to that in her personal story in a very compelling way. So we need to be persistent because it takes time. I think it took us almost, I'm trying to think back, our senior housing project in Monterey, I think it was built in 2019, completed in 2019. We started talking about that in 2013. So, you know, it takes years sometimes, but you have to stay persistent. And we're going to keep our eye focused on things like Garden Road and other projects. So persistence, advocacy, remaining hopeful, and being grateful. And on the spirit of gratefulness, I really want to thank the Methodist Church, this church in particular, for being the first, if not one of the first, faith communities that welcome the car homeless. Mm-hmm. And I'm personally really appreciative of that. It was about 10 years ago, we organized the Hungry and Homeless Symposium at MPC. We partnered with a lot of the nonprofits that are represented here and others, MPC, the City of Monterey, and others. And I became aware of gaps in what was needed. We saw that there were car homeless who really had literally no place they could legally sleep in anywhere in the whole county. And it was shocking to me. We would have folks coming to our meetings, usually complaining about someone sleeping in a car or an RV near their business or in their neighborhood. And again, it was always in the context of criminality and fear. And the staff was very responsive about sending police out to move those folks on. And it just struck me, this seems really backwards and crazy. And so One Starfish was created, I think partly out of that. And again, Methodist Church here, one of the first faith communities to allow folks to park here, and there are others. And that's been a wildly successful program. We have other reasons for hope, and we have made progress. The Gathering for Women is a program that evolved, and the Homeless Women Fund in response to another gap, which was services for single women in particular in our community. And today, in the partnership between the Gathering for Women and Community Human Services, which is the board that I serve on as a board member, we now have Casa de Noche Buena in Seaside, which is, providing transitional shelter for up to 30 women and families. We also have a new shelter on the way due to the generosity of a man named Mark Schumann, who bought a property on Franklin Street in Monterey. And again, Community Human Services and Gathering for Women are partnering on developing that as a shelter that we hope will open next year. We're right now in the basically the fundraising phase. We have the building, but the building needs to be remodeled to become appropriate housing. So, but we're making progress. We're also making progress on housing. It's difficult and slow. Matt spoke to a few successes, and we have had a few successes. So next, I really want to talk about advocacy and kind of what you can do. As I mentioned, it makes a difference when you write letters, but even more of a difference if you're able to show up at a meeting when a city council or a school board, for that matter, is talking about housing or homelessness. When I was elected to Monterey City Council in 2012, I think really the attitude was we have enough housing, affordable housing. We need more, literally, the philosophy was we need more high-end housing because that generates more tax revenue, right? And I think there was an attitude towards homeless people, again, that really they were criminals and they were bad people. And you just need to sort of clean them up, which is a term that's always really bothered me, right? Sweeps, it's a word that always really bothered me. You're talking about people, right? But yet we talk about sweeping people like they're trash. And that was, I think, pretty much the dominant attitude, both among our staff and among our council. I'm happy to say that's not true today. I don't believe that's true. I believe our staff, as a result of a lot of advocacy, a lot of meetings that went until 1 a.m, and a lot of people coming and speaking, and elections, and having different faces on the council that are listening to different voices. We now have a council and a staff that are really committed to building more affordable housing, and that's pretty rare. There's not, I think, a lot of communities on the peninsula where I would say that's necessarily true. And I think our staff is responding to that. But I wanted to highlight a few things that you can maybe pay attention to if they come up at your city council and try to advocate for them. So first of all, inclusionary housing. That's a kind of a technical term, but it basically means that when developers build housing, a certain percentage of it is set aside and it's deed restricted. So it can't just kind of be flipped into something, into market rate right away or very easily. But it's deed restricted affordable housing. And there are different levels of affordable housing. I'm not going to go into that. You always want to advocate for the more expansive, because we need extreme income affordable housing. That's actually going to help homeless folks. We also do need very low income and low income. But so does your city have an inclusionary housing policy? If they don't, they should. Monterey's is 20%, so any project that has 5 or more units has to have at least, well, 1 if it's 5, but 20%. Try to make sure your city has one. Zoning. So you know, Monterey has recently looked at our zoning to permit conversion of commercial property into housing. Does your city allow that? If not, that's something you could advocate for. Especially we have a lot of commercial property coming empty just due to the changing economy. Make sure that, what is your sort of planned mix in your city plan for the amount of multifamily housing versus single family housing? We need a lot more multifamily housing because that by design is more affordable and can house more people. Does your city have a policy as far as giving concessions to developers? If they do, those concessions should be for affordable housing. You know, so make sure that they're not giving away the store without getting something in return that's going to house people in need who work here. Rent assistance. So we started that this past year, and I think the county has jumped on board. But that's going to be very important going forward. That it's not just an emergency thing, but we actually need an ongoing rental assistance program. I got 2 more points. The percentage of your general, does your city spend any of their general fund on housing or homelessness? If not, look into that. We're looking at a cannabis, having cannabis, commercial cannabis. I'm going to try to make sure a certain percentage of the cannabis revenue generated goes to homelessness and housing. And then the last thing I'm going to say is water. You know, our biggest obstacle right now is water, and the State Water Resource Board, or you know, just trying to make sure that we can actually have water, especially for affordable housing, because you all know about that issue. And then finally, aside from advocacy, please do support all the great organizations. Support Interim, support Gathering for Women, support Community Human Services, support Community Housing Solution, or Homelessness Solutions, I think it's called, Salvation Army, Interfaith, the iHelp. There's so many great organizations. Please support the one that speaks to you the most. Thank you.
And that gives me time for a good commercial. There are 3 orange pages over there, and those are some of those organizations that Alan and others have mentioned. They're not all of them, we know. And so feel free, there's 3 pages, and you need to pick up all 3 of them. So, and feel free, if you need to stand up or walk around a little bit or move or whatever, feel free to do that. Because didn't really, the treats?
No, the camera. Be aware of the camera.
Oh, yeah. Okay, very good. So next, we're going to hear from Deb, also from Interim. Looking forward to this.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to stand up and talk because I've been sitting too long.
Yeah.
And I have a new knee that is telling me I need to stand up. You've already heard Kontrena's amazing story of resilience and hope. And I am very proud to represent the agency that helps people with mental illness become fully who they can be. We do feel the homelessness situation and the affordable housing situation very acutely with the community that we serve. We've been in Monterey County for 46 years, and our agency specifically provides housing for people with mental illness. That has become a growing issue within our community. As people become homeless, they are traumatized, they are often victims of people taking advantage of them, stealing from them, victims of crime, which increases the trauma, which increases the mental instability. We have taken at Interim has taken the stand that in order to provide housing, to find housing for people with mental illness who have little to no income, we have to build it ourselves. And we've taken that as the mandate for our agency since the beginning. Right now we have 20 supported housing projects in the county of Monterey. We have housing in Marina, in Salinas, in Monterey. We broke ground last month on a new apartment complex in Salinas, which will specifically house people coming in off of the street with mental illness, the people that you see living in Chinatown, the people you see living on the beach in Monterey. That is the specific target of our newest housing project. It's taken 45 years to really build a reputation. At the beginning, we fought a lot of not in my backyard kind of attitudes. The best way to combat that is to build the prettiest, the best maintained apartment complex in the neighborhood, and that's the way our agency has approached this. Right now, we have about 300 beds that we take responsibility for. By taking responsibility for, I mean not only are we providing them housing, but we are providing them case management for their disability. We provide counseling and resources. We get them connected with Social Security, disability, whatever they need. We have counselors who spend time on the streets of Monterey and Salinas, talking with people who are homeless, making friendships, building trust, because a lot of these people have been burned a lot by historically by agencies and other kinds of people that are trying to be generous and be good, and it's not always. It's hard to build trust sometimes when you've been burned, and that's what we do. We also support the families of people who have mental illness in their families. NAMI is National Alliance on Mental Illness. It has an agency here in Monterey, but we partner with them. And I'm going to do a little commercial while I'm here. We're having a free webinar on special needs trusts in October, and it's something that you can sign up for if you have a family member who has a disability, either a mental health disability or a physical disability, and you want to provide for them after you are gone. There are ways to do that that does not involve them losing their Social Security, or there are ways that you can do that to protect their Social Security and other disability income. And there are cards over there on the table. Please feel free. It's a free seminar. It's going to be done on Zoom, so you can sit in your jammies and watch us. and learn about how to take care of family members. But we do everything that we can. Kontrena is especially gifted at talking to people. You've probably gathered that by listening to her. She's got the lived experience. That's another thing that Interim does for clients is we provide employment. We have a total of about 220 employees throughout the county. About 20% of them have lived experience with mental health disabilities. So not only do we provide them housing, and we provide them recovery resources, and we help them get medication that they need, but we also provide jobs for them, and they train in wherever their gifts are. Kontrena's gift is obviously speaking and meeting with people and helping them. Her gift is incredibly important to our agency, and we really appreciate her. And that's why I'm here, just to tell you that there's more to Interim than just the homelessness. There's a way of keeping people housed, and it's one thing to bring somebody in off the street, maybe like I helped us with housing in a church and getting them a little bit stable, and then there's another point where you get them to maybe into an apartment for a while. But keeping them housed is what is often very difficult. And that's where Interim really shines. We do whatever it takes to keep our clients housed, whether that means we work with Meals on Wheels to provide them with food and services through them, or we even partner with, we have housing that if an individual can't adequately take care of themselves in terms of keeping their apartment clean, we have cleaners that come in and help them. Whatever it takes to keep somebody housed, that's what Interim is willing to do. So thank you for letting me bend your ear for a little while, and I'm happy to answer your questions when questions time comes.
And then our last person is Kate Daniels, and she's the one who brought 2 pieces of homework for us today. In case you weren't here earlier, the 2 white sheets on the green table over here are some legislation that we can all support, that we can take back to family, friends, churches, organizations, and I think Kate's going to speak about them a little bit too. So Kate?
Thank you so much, and I'll stand up as well. I think I've been sitting a little long too. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much. And does that work if I keep my mask on? You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'll try to keep it right here. Thank you for having me. And for those of you who may not know who I am, I work for Senator Laird, but I work for Senator Laird only part-time. I also serve as a Monterey County Planning Commissioner and then on various boards, such as the Gathering for Women. My role with Senator Laird is actually perfect for, I'm going to take this off, for this topic, because I serve as a policy advisor on both housing and homelessness and on water. I've had a long relationship with Senator Laird, and when he was elected, we engaged in several months of conversations about how I might be helpful and what I was passionate about and would I join the team, and we agreed at the end of the day that it would be great to join the team if we could really move forward solutions on our water crisis here on the Monterey Peninsula and on homelessness. And since those are my 2 issue areas that I was most passionate about, he was kind enough to hire me and let me work on just that. So it's really exciting. He actually threw Big Sur in there too, because he needed someone who was connected to the area. And so it's not that I really get to spend half my time on water and half my time on homelessness. I also have a big geographic area that I'm responsible for as well. But the 2 areas are important and connected. And I didn't actually think I was going to come and talk about water today, but it is really integral to us being able to move housing solutions forward on the Monterey Peninsula. And I'll say 2 things about water. One is that that is the focus of my water portion of my job, which is sort of putting the politics aside and moving forward projects that can help us increase our capacity and our supply so water does not become an obstacle any longer or can be used as an obstacle any longer for housing development, but then also ensuring that the guardrails are there so when we do have water, the water is for the housing that we need and not for second and third homes for folks who want to come and retire here. There's nothing wrong with retiring here. It's always, I mean, I've lived here my whole life. There's been a group of people that have been retirees on the Monterey Peninsula forever, but that's not the housing that we need. I also sit on the Planning Commission, and it's something that I've brought up quite a lot, especially when we have the Inclusionary Housing Ordinance coming back up for review. We are currently at 20% for all of unincorporated Monterey County, except in certain areas where it's actually 25%. And then in other areas, which we just had the big Rancho Cañada decision, that area was actually set aside as 50% inclusionary housing, and that was overturned by the applicant, and we, I think, barely squeezed by maybe 28%. So this was the Rancho Cañada Villages project.
Where?
Rancho Cañada is at the mouth of Carmel Valley. It was the former golf course.
Former golf course.
Yes. So anyway, moving along from that, what I think would be most valuable to talk about today in my role as the Senator's policy advisor is what this year actually affords us in terms of the advocacy that Alan Hoffa was talking about and others are talking about. Because what just happened in the legislature just came to a conclusion. And what we saw was the largest package for homelessness signed into law that the state has ever seen before. It's actually 10 times more money invested in homelessness programs and solutions and housing than we've ever seen set aside. And it's basically $12 billion for programs and services. And so the advocacy part is really ensuring that folks and jurisdictions are aware of what opportunities exist so we can get out there and either encourage our jurisdictions or as groups and programs apply for the funding and move the kind of projects forward that need to be moved forward. I know that Alan talked about the Casa de Noche Buena, and Casa de Noche Buena was a perfect example of an opportunity was created by the state, and community members gathered together with organizations and said, we want to take advantage of this funding. We want to see this on the Monterey Peninsula. And it wasn't easy. It really wasn't easy. I mean, there was probably 5 or so community meetings in the city of Seaside. And the city of Seaside, the reason we gravitated toward that location was because there was a building that we were able to get for $1 a year from the county of Monterey that happened to be in the homeless overlay zone. So there was only a ministerial permit involved and it really couldn't be denied. And we had a lot of the community come out that really distressed about this idea that this is where the revitalization efforts were happening, and here you want to put a homeless shelter. And so we did exactly what Reverend Alice-Ann was saying. Oh, no, it wasn't. I'm sorry, it was Deb. We made it the most attractive building, and we really said, answered all the questions that the community had, really took the time to listen and to respond to the concerns and questions that people had. And now the project has opened, and it's not the eyesore, it's not the gathering place for other homeless individuals that was the biggest concern that people had, and it's truly a success. And I'll say that the reason programs like Casa de Noche Buena and Gathering for Women are a success is because of the partnership and the work that we do with folks like Interim. And if we didn't work together with organizations like Interim, we wouldn't be able to provide all the wraparound services that truly move people from homelessness to housing. So if I were to tell you just a couple of the things that's important for this conversation and really valuable, is that this funding, this $12 billion in funding, includes things like $5 billion for Project Home Key acquisitions, new Project Home Key acquisitions. And what Project Home Key is that's where you hear about old motels and hotels or other commercial buildings being converted to permanent housing. And so over the next 2 years, $5 billion, it's hard to say that, $5 billion will be allocated throughout the state of California to invest in these acquisitions. The first round has just been released. I'm not sure exactly how much it is, $1.4 billion. The deadline, I believe, has passed to submit an application. We've got 6 great potential projects in the Salinas Valley, but there have been no applications on the Monterey Peninsula. And if there have been no applications on the Monterey Peninsula, even if folks are unhoused, they have a place of residence, a city of residence. So I hope all 6 of those projects in the Salinas Valley get passed. We could cut our homeless population in half, but it won't do anything for the folks whose place of residence is here because they will not be able to occupy any of those units. And so that's where I'm thinking the advocacy is what is needed. People need to come together. Wow, this money won't be here, I don't think, ever again. The opportunity the state had to make this investment, I don't think will exist. I mean, I hope it does, but we just really can't bank on it. This was a major investment. So there are going to be several other rounds of home key funding, and our communities, our jurisdictions, and I'm going to say, I'm not looking at the city of Monterey. The city of Monterey has done more for housing than probably any other jurisdiction, but the jurisdictions need to come together and at least find one location on the Monterey Peninsula that we can work together and move through this process and apply for this funding. And so that's one of the areas that is funded. Another thing that's funded is for mental health services and for the elderly. This plan, this packet provides a lot of funding for to meet those needs. So that's the homeless package that was AB 140 and that was signed into law by Governor Newsom. I think it was back in July. And again, it's the largest homeless package that has ever been passed in the state of California. It's $12 billion, and we just need to stay informed and be on top of it. So as jurisdictions, we apply for this funding. The other thing that this year's legislation provides us is 2 pieces of legislation that I think could really address what Dr. McKibben was talking about, which I believe she called it scientific racism. Thank you, scientific racism. I wrote that down. And single-family residential zoning in the state of California is one of those systemic ideologies that has been imposed on Californians that has made it race-based in terms of success in housing. And there are 2 pieces of legislation this year, SB 9 and SB 10, that did pass that a long time coming set out to actually dismantle those systems. And boy, has there been a lot of NIMBY response to SB 9 and SB 10. I'm not as familiar with SB 10, but I did bring a fact sheet. But they're very similar in that they allow a single lot to be subdivided to allow for duplexes. And in fact, it can be subdivided in SB 9 twice. A property could be cut in half and you could have 2 duplexes, which is 4 units. And then for SB 10, if you're near transportation and you meet other factors, a lot could actually be subdivided to create up to 10 units. And so the reason that is important for me, I work with homeless women mostly in my hat with Gathering for Women, is even just this week, I talked to a woman whose her husband's filing for divorce this week. And her top concern is, where am I going to live? I didn't plan for this. Unless somehow I get a settlement in this divorce, I won't have the rent to stay in Monterey County. And at Gathering for Women, besides health factors that often lead women to lose their housing, age, divorce, there's various factors, being on a fixed income, not being able to maintain a home that you've been living in for a number of years. What SB 9 provides is the opportunity, much like an ADU, to create another unit on your lot. What you can also do, and it's a funny way of looking at it, is you can take half your lot and you can sell it to another potential homeowners. So that would likely be at a lower cost, and that homeowner would be able to put a duplex on that lot and house up to 2 units. And having grown up actually in a duplex with my grandparents for much of my childhood in Los Angeles, the unit that was above my grandparents was affordable by design, and it allowed them to live in their home for their entire lives. And one of the things that I grew up here in this area, and I've watched the transition. I've watched folks that were able to live here get priced out of the area, children who grew up here get priced out of the area, parents who had children and they raised their children get priced out of the area for all the various different reasons. I know people on social media now who are realtors, and I watch them fist bumping and high-fiving when they sell a property in Seaside for $1.4 million. And I have to gently remind them that that's a really embarrassing post. I mean, if you feel like it, toast yourselves, in private. But if you don't recognize the ripple effect that selling a home for $1.5 million in Seaside has on all of the rents and all of the houses in the jurisdiction, you need to know. And so, anyhow, what I believe with SB 9 in particular, because SB 10 might be more effective in more highly urbanized areas, but for SB 9 in particular, that we will have the opportunity, much like the ADU law that went into effect prior in the state of California.
Define that for people.
The ADU?
Yeah.
So ADU is an accessory dwelling unit, and I'm going to put my hat from the Planning Commission on right now that if you're in unincorporated Monterey County, I realize we're in the city of Pacific Grove, and we're from areas like the city of Monterey or other parts of the other jurisdictions, but if you're in unincorporated Monterey County, how many people in this room know that you can put an 800 square foot or less ADU on your property without anybody telling you no? Not the water management district, not the health department, not because of your septic, not the county because of the permit. Nobody can say no. Did you know that?
Yep.
Coastal Commission.
Not the Coastal Commission. 1,200 square foot or less, if it's somewhere between 801 and 1,200, all of those other various restrictions or impositions might come into effect. But 800 square feet or less, state law overrides all local zoning and permitting requirements. So like the ADU law, what SB 9 provides is the opportunity to take a property where there's one single family home and turn it into 2 residences in the form of a duplex or another house on the property. So I did bring some fact sheets from the legislators that drafted the legislation that has passed, if you want them. I'm here to answer any questions, and that 15 minutes went by really fast. So thank you all very much.
I think we all want to say a very big thank you to Dr. Carroll and to Kontrena and to Matt and Alan and Deb and Kate. Let's have one more round of applause. I have 2 questions to start us off, and then if the panelists want to interact with each other. I know there's a meeting on housing on September 29th in Monterey. Is that something we should be present at?
Yes.
Okay, some of you, I am on the list to get any emails when the city council is dealing with anything having to do with housing. And I can speak from experience at the Monterey United Methodist Church, wanted to do what the Pacific Grove Church did with one starfish, and NIMBY neighbors came out in force.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, and so just, it's really important, as Alan said. My other question is, when we ask developers, and for any of you on the panel, to have a certain percentage of their building to be low cost or whatever, my understanding is that sometimes they have a way of getting out of that, and how do we prevent that? Who wants to speak to that?
I can speak to it with my planning commissioner hat on, I'll just say that the whole way in which we approach the inclusionary housing requirements is backwards. And so a couple things. One, there's something called in lieu fees. And I'm really happy to be on a commission where I believe all 10 of us feel the same about in lieu fees. You don't get enough money, it's not worth it, and the affordable housing never gets developed. So no to in lieu fees. If you're at a hearing and you're listening and there's a conversation about whether or not we should accept the in lieu fees, the answer should always be no. We need the house built, and the housing needs to be built first before the market rate housing is built. The second thing is, right now the county is looking into revisiting the inclusionary housing ordinance and perhaps even lowering the percentage from 20 to something less. The way that developers often get out of the requirement is they make a pitch to the commission or whomever, whatever body it is there before, that it's not penciling out for them to be able to include the units. That is the most ironic response anyone could ever give, because they are designing the development. They can design it in any way that they need to make sure that it pencils out for them. This isn't a choice, it's a requirement. And so one of the things that they try to do is make all the units exactly the same. The inclusionary units are larger than they necessarily need to be. This can be done tastefully and done well. Units can be affordable by design. There's a lot of ways to accomplish this. And the bottom line is they don't want to do it. They want to make money, and that cannot be a determining factor when we're making decisions as a body.
I think Matt would also like
Carol
to.
had a comment.
Yeah, and Matt asked, yeah, we can pass it on down.
Go first.
Okay.
Mine might be a little long.
Everybody was so inspiring. I really hope that we all took that away. And I wanted to respond to an underlying theme that has run through this, and that is the condemnation of the NIMBY attitude as somehow these are evil people, right? This is not true. We have all in this country internalized this idea that poor people and people of color are less valuable, right? So when these developers, why don't they want more affordable housing in Rancho Cordova? Why? Because they've internalized the ideology married to policy that goes back for decades, I mean hundreds of years, but really policies in place for decades, even when those policies are overturned, especially when those policies are overturned. You're getting the pushback. Yes, they're greedy. We all know that. But beyond that, it's not an individual flaw any more than in Seaside, it's a flaw of that community. We have all internalized this idea that what is affordable, what responds to homeless people, what responds is worth less. It's worth less in our society. And I would like, scientific racism was the ideology, but what we're facing is a systemic racism.
Yes.
And that is very, very difficult to deconstruct because we've internalized it at such a deep level. So I think it's good. These policies are tremendously important, but it's a lot harder to change hearts and minds, right? Yes. It's a lot harder, and the first thing we need to do is understand where it all came from and know that it was a flawed way of thinking to begin with, because, I think that's the only way. And we really need to understand why people are responding the way they are in Salinas and Seaside and in all sorts of places, not just in Carmel Valley, right? Matt, what do you do?
Okay, just a couple minutes. So I've been working on inclusionary ordinances for over 20 years. And they are complicated because our housing market is complicated. more so than we give it credit sometimes. And so what happens is that whatever percentage we want to put on needs to be embedded in the realities on the ground. There are costs to development. There are only a certain amount of rents that can be applied. There are only so many price points to sell a home in a given market. We do have the wonderful air and coastline and all these amazing things, right, going for us than you would otherwise. I'm from the Central Valley, so I could talk about places like Fresno, right? Like, I love it. Grew up there, but I ain't going back. Sorry, Mom. Sorry, Dad. So I just want to say that in evaluating the inclusionary ordinance, there's a lot of science, there's a lot of art, and it's going to be a balance. And part of finding the balance is doing an economic study. And the economic study in of itself isn't the end-all be-all, because there's lots of ways to, where's the data coming from? Oh, you're getting it from the developer. Okay, well, the developer's going to cook their books a little bit. Okay, well, then you got to get this third-party data over here. It's all of that. You have to study the heck out of it. At some point, we just say, look, here's the options. It's a political decision in the end. It's about the willpower of the folks, whether it's supervisors or council members, to make the call. And where Monterey Bay Economic Partnership is at, and where we've kind of figured out our voices, like, look, you guys go ahead and fight it out in terms of, the exact fees. We'd like to push it in the direction of, we want units, not money. Sometimes there's a need for those options. Alan mentioned earlier, okay, it's only for units that are a certain number, right? 5 or 6, and then it triggers. Okay, well, but what about the smaller ones? In Santa Cruz, as an example, they allow options, and you can pay half in lieu, half you build on site. Maybe it's time to look at something like that. Is it working for them, etc. There's also very few opportunities to raise money for housing that we know is needed. So what affordable housing developers actually rely on and look to in lieu fees, transiency occupancy taxes, other inflows of revenue to support affordable housing. In lieu fees actually have been an important part of Monterey County's building up some level of housing. I want to challenge what I heard earlier in terms of I never want to let this guy off the hook. So somebody, I won't say who, said they're doing really, really good on housing. Yes, and Monterey County's regional housing needs was 650 units established back the last cycle, the 5th cycle that we did, last 7 years. We're entering a new cycle, 650 units, of which only around 108 have been permitted. So 16.6%. So I think we're falling short. What's interesting, the dynamic, and I'll leave this, the last thing I'll say around this is, because it leads us back to inclusionary, is Monterey County unincorporated, and I'm sure our commissioner knows this. Congratulations, you've achieved your RENA. You have something to say about that. You have 113%. It was 1,551 units. We get 1,753. Yay! But you peel back the onion a little bit, and it makes you cry, because most of that, in fact, hardly any of it, just a few units, were in the very low and low income percentages. We have way more above moderate units than we need. So we have probably, and this is where the other thing comes in, there should be a talk about a vacancy tax or these other things where the folks that have more than abundance on top of abundance, let's make sure that those opportunities don't go away, and that folks pay their fair share on that. And so that's mostly what the inclusionary is, paying your fair share as a market rate developer. This is only one tool. Inclusionary, we fight it out, and there's a lot of stuff around that, but this is only one tool. There's lots of other ways to get there. And in order to make it feasible for the developers to do it, you do need to address zoning. You need to address the impact fees. We shouldn't have $50,000, $60,000 impact fees. Let's bring that down to a normal level. Trust me, I am not the developer's best friend. And they know that too. But sometimes they'll return my call because they know that I'm trying to get to a compromise level. Again, leaning forward, leaning toward more units at the lower income level, because that's where the need is at. Thank you.
Matt, if I may just comment real quick.
Just as a Monterey County Planning Commissioner, when we looked at that success and we were all patting ourselves on the back, one of the things that concerned me is that we counted all of the wonderful farm worker housing projects, and that's why we looked so successful. And the question that I had for staff was, do we count seasonal housing toward meeting our RHNA goal? We never got an answer to that, but it, to me, was unsettling that we would say we're successful because we built housing that's only occupied for a portion of the year. And so I think we really need to look at, this is not a cut on that housing. The farm worker housing projects have been really successful, and I'm glad we've moved them through the permitting process and that they're getting developed. But I don't think when we were thinking of RHNA goals and why they're important and what housing we're developing, we had seasonal projects like this in mind. And that's one of the reasons that the county's numbers looked so good.
That's a great point. Just to add on to that super quick is that those, and to your, just to quickly tie that, is that's addressing a huge need in terms of those folks would normally be taking on motel units, or they would be cramming in and they continue to cram in wherever they can with family members or otherwise. So it's super important. But again, remember that farm worker housing study said the biggest need is for families, and none of those projects
Have families, single men.
That's all I wanted.
Or I guess there's some women.
There's some women,
But
yes,
singles.
but that's all I'll say. Sorry about that.
I just had a quick question on terminology. A couple of you called about in lieu fees. I have no idea what that is.
I'll give it back to the
Okay.
In lieu of. In lieu of.
And in lieu fee is the amount of money a developer can pay to get out of their affordable housing obligation. So if they have an obligation, they can say instead, and the reason it's problematic is that number is really low. It's really, really low. So there was a situation in the city of Marina where the council recently just accepted in lieu fees instead of, I want to say it was 60 units. And they accepted $1.5 million for 1.4. I mean, it doesn't pencil out. And the idea was that those fees would be applied toward future development, but in other jurisdictions we learned it just doesn't happen. Well, except when Matt's involved.
Allison, over here. There may be a representative from Home Match in the group.
There is.
Oh, there she is, and I told her she could have a few minutes during the question and answer period, say a little bit about Home Match. So could you give her the microphone?
Yes, so please take the microphone so it's recorded.
The microphone.
Come on up, Doris.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, I'd like to ask if
Microphone close to that.
I'd like to ask if home sharing is being considered as an option to affordable housing. We have all these empty bedrooms in the community that could be shared, and that's what Home Match does. We match people to home share, which solves the problem of affordable housing. It also solves a problem of folks feeling isolated and folks maybe needing help around their home. So I think it's a good option to consider, and we would also love to find out how we could ever get it to count towards the RHNA goal. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And I have information available.
Is it on the table?
It's not, but
Okay.
I'll put it there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And it's a really good question. And right now, in terms of some of the research that we've been doing to try to find out, Home Match solves two major problems. You might have a homeowner who is priced out of the ability to stay in their home if they can rent out a room and be matched with an individual who's unhoused or who is housing insecure. You solve a housing problem for two individuals on the Monterey Peninsula. It's really important. And right now we're being told that these rooms are not going to be counted toward the RHNA goal because they're not new units. But in fact, I think we might have an issue of creative thinking that if this is actually a new unit that didn't exist because before this program. And so I'm holding out hope that we can keep looking into this. been sort of abysmal at reaching that goal, every jurisdiction, everywhere in the county. So perhaps this could help on two fronts, but the program, Doris, has been so successful, and we are all grateful to the work that you and Covia Home Match are doing.
And that's another reason to pick up the pumpkin colored sheets up there, because it talks about Covia and Home Match in that. So yes, I think we're ready for questions from the audience, and if you want to.
I'll hand her the microphone.
Yeah, but I just want to say it clearly, and also if you wanted to, one of the speakers let us know, or whether it's general. Thank you.
Matt, how do we all get on your email list?
You can make the check payable. We'll send out an email, and so be sure everybody registered. So I'll make sure to get the right link out there, because it's easier, instead of having you go through our tree of the, I want to make sure the right link gets out there, and so we'll do an email. Is that okay?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You can do that.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name's William Guzman. I just moved to the area 2 years ago. Before I say what I'm going to say, you need to know that I've been a realtor since 1983. I'm now a broker, and I now have a business that I'm running out of Pacific Grove. Recently, from LA, fighting for affordable housing is something I did a lot. One thing though, with all the good stuff about the ADUs, room share, things like this, we're missing one key ingredient. Quite often you are taking someone who has never been a landlord, making them a landlord, and when they make their property a duplex, they are now subject to rent control, something else that they may not understand. So, to the state level, we need something in that allows some basic training for someone completing or converting their property to create these extra units, so they know what the risks are when they do this and how to be a landlord, because it's critical. You could be really messed up. That friendship, that extra income might disappear, and your battle to get it back could be huge if you don't understand the risk when you go in as a landlord.
Thank you. That's point well noted.
There's a question.
I'll just respond to that.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
Yep.
Thank you. And I just wanted to highlight that the local Association of Realtors is very active in this space. So I don't know if you know John and Scott Digg. They're really strong in supporting their membership with exactly what you're talking about. You know, I believe there's free or reduced legal support for them to help answer those questions, because it is critically important that we have really good landlords. We have plenty of unscrupulous landlords out there. Can we get some good ones? And there are some really good landlords, and so we want to support them and build from there. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Nancy Sule, and I live in Old Town Monterey. And my background is 35 years in mortgage industry, and I specialized in affordable housing, first-time buyer programs in that time. So one of my passions is trying to keep the balance between the architecture in Old Town, which I love, the needs of the affordable housing and so forth. And I want to come in, like Alan Hoffa said, the senior project on Van Buren, which is a block from where I live, is a beautiful project. And I love to see that Kate, you mentioned that was, I believe your name is Kate, that you mentioned that Deb, that you mentioned that the design was going to be a priority. But one of the things that you didn't mention that I'm also concerned about and have been speaking to and writing about is the parking issue that is coming as the affordable housing units, the ADUs, are made, which will be coming around. Also to the importance of restricting the vacation Airbnbs. Because what I think will happen is that people will go under the ADU project, lack of any restrictions for the permitting. They will build it, but they'll use it as an ADU. And many times people are renting Airbnb type things under the radar. And my real concern is that. But going back to the parking issue, one of the things that Monterey did about 2 weeks ago was had a parking survey and also a town hall on it. And one of the things that I advocated when they had a meeting on it was that first of all, I can only speak, I research a lot with Monterey's code, and I can't speak to PG or Pacific Grove or Carmel or the others, but in Monterey, you build it at the back behind a single family home. So that works well, and in my house, I have a single family home where my husband and I live, and behind it in a garage building, we have the apartment above, which we rent. We rent it at a moderate price to, and we've always rented it to full-time employed people that are local here. So it is housing for the workforce, but parking is an issue, and what I was advocating was the height of the zoning to allow a higher than the 16-foot state requirement, or the state requires that you can just automatically get a permit up to 16 feet. I was advocating that if there was parking on site being made into it, and particularly above a garage, that you could put it reasonably behind it. Now, as I drove in, I saw even here in Pacific Grove, many of the homes have larger units behind. And Old Town, and particularly Lower Old Town, which Alan knows that area, is also an area where we have a lot of the units that are built behind, and they do work beautifully. So try to, in fact, one of the things I've been researching is design that works in Old Town. And I could show anybody who's interested, an affordable ADU could work well and look a part of the community. It doesn't have to be an eyesore. So I applaud those goals that you have of making design appropriate, but I think parking is also something you're going to have to realize. It could be even a dangerous situation, as impactful as it is in some areas. And my area is up to 6 units. So there are a lot of people living in an area with only 2 street parking. Thank you. Makes sense.
Anybody else?
Yeah, just super quick. So in terms of SB 9, it would only apply to the single family residential areas that are 1 unit right now, and it wouldn't apply to historical districts as well. And there is a parking requirement. And I believe with the ADUs in the county, there's also a parking requirement. But the SB 9 parking requirement does not apply if the property is within a certain distance of a transit facility or a bus stop that runs on a really regular type of cycle. Yes?
That is true, but Monterey has determined that all of Monterey, with the exception of Deer Flats, is within a half a mile of a transit. So, in a sense, no parking is required.
Right, but you'd also have to check the frequency of the transit. I mean, it was like every 15 minutes the stop had to run, and that's a pretty frequent transit stop. I don't know that.
No, there is none.
Yeah, but anyway, I wanted to also say that it is really important as part of this conversation to look at the impact of short-term rentals on the availability of rental units in the county and in our jurisdictions. And it's one of the things that the county's in the process of hopefully paying for the report that will investigate that relationship, because we really can't move forward until we know exactly how many units are taken off the market that were rental units to become vacation units. And then the last thing I'll say is it's part of, even if the fear is that there's no enforcement, it is part of the state ADU law and it's part of the county ADU ordinance that these new ADUs cannot be used for short-term rentals. So if your fear is that someone is going to do that anyway, that's one thing, and that's okay. That's a true, honest fear. But the repercussions do exist, and the fines, if you are taking an ADU that you built and developed and are renting it on a short-term basis. Last thing I'll say is the fear of SB 9 becoming a speculation opportunity or an investment opportunity. There's a guardrail in SB 9 that you have to be owner occupied. The owner has to live in one of the units if a new one is built and a duplex is created. So those guardrails are in place.
Is that just for 3 years?
3 years, 3 years from the point of conversion.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to speak to that too, because I share your concern, Nancy, that new units getting built become vacation home rentals. And the problem with that is, first of all, it's very expensive to build new housing. So expanding our housing costs a lot of money. Well, if you lose 1,000 units to vacation rentals, think about how long and how much money it takes to just replace what you've lost. So it's like you're building a big hole. And, you know, we're not adding more housing, which is what we need, but we're just trying to fill that hole that's lost to vacation rentals. If your city doesn't have a ordinance limiting vacation rentals, Pacific Grove, of course, has been fighting this, and you do have some limits, which is great. Monterey has a hard ban on it, and we actually contract with a company that monitors it. So they monitor the websites that advertise. We respond to complaints, anonymous complaints, to our city phone number, and we've had pretty good success at policing it. Ultimately, though, it's great that the state says these units can't become vacation rentals, these new ADUs, but it will be up to your jurisdiction to police that. That's the reality, and that costs money, but you actually have to have a plan in place to do it. So that, I would really, again, encourage you to follow up with your jurisdictions to make sure that they have an enforcement plan in place and that they have a policy in place, because we can't afford to lose units.
Melissa, you had a question, just a minute.
Thank you very much. I think I'll direct my question to Alan, the counselor. You had mentioned earlier that on September 29th there will be a meeting. Will that be at the City Hall location?
I'll have to check. I can't remember.
Okay.
Probably. I'm guessing it will be.
And what will be the main subject of that particular meeting?
Oh,
Thank you.
sorry, sitting down on the job.
So yeah, I've been attending meetings remotely, so honestly I haven't been paying that much attention, but my guess is it would be at City Hall, and that we've been doing hybrid meetings, so you can show up in person or you can attend virtually, okay? And I haven't read the agenda packet yet, but my understanding is, broadly speaking, we're looking at what's called rent stabilization. So that could be, it's a variety of things. It's going to be a staff report. I don't think we're taking action, but things like, for example, do we extend the eviction moratorium? Yes or no? Do we look at some kind of rent stabilization that's more vigorous than the state's? The state currently has a rent control policy that rent can be raised 5% plus the cost of living percentage, which, you know, typically is somewhere between 2 to 3 to 4%. So we've been, and they can do that once a year. But anyway, looking at rent control, rent stabilization, rental assistance. There are other kinds of policies that I think the renter advocacy community is interested in. For example, I'm trying to remember the term for this. But anyway, there's just a variety of policies relating to how we manage rentals in the city.
Okay, thank you. Michael?
Okay, Michael, okay. Yeah, and then, did you have one, Neil?
No, somebody behind me.
Oh, okay.
First of all, I'd like to thank all of our panelists for just a wealth of information. This forum has been sponsored by 3 members of the faith community. So my question is, what specific actions would you recommend for the faith community that we within the faith community can take in support of these actions, and so that it becomes more than just talk, but it moves it into action.
Great question.
I would like to answer that.
Okay, I hope there are a few answers to that.
We each have a personal stake in what's going on in Monterey County and what's going on in your neighborhoods. Find one part to take action on and follow through. Write letters. Go to the meetings. Go to your supervisor. Find out who your representative is. Make sure that you're supporting their representative, making sure that they know what your idea, what your solutions are. Don't just come with a problem. Come with a solution.
Awesome. Anybody else? Carol?
Go ahead. If you don't mind.
No.
In addition to the advocacy and laying it out, just as she said, there are particular sites. There may be sites that have a tie directly or potentially very strong tie to the faith communities, and you have a voice in that. It is really hard to find. You need money, you need property, you need policy, and you need political will. That's the four main ingredients. So on the site piece, if there's a site that is available to the faith community, bring that up and find a partner. There's many examples of partnerships even in our region. St. Stephen's Church in Live Oak, I forget how many units now, but they worked with McKibben Housing and created a wonderful community there. And so that was many, many years in the making. So there's lots of examples, and we can help bring those forward. Any of you have partnerships already or friendships with some of those resources already.
Carol was going to respond.
I was going to respond because, I'm sorry. Apologies. I think that, Michael suggested just talk, but in fact, talk is a really good thing. It's a very, very good start. And one of the things that the faith communities in this country have always done have been at the forefront of civil rights activism, going way back in time. And it began with conversations just like this. So I think one thing that can happen that's wonderful are more forums like this. And faith communities have the space and the energy and the organizational structure to host them. So that is a huge, huge part of it. And it does move the needle and raise awareness and appreciation for not just the problems, but also policy solutions.
I just have a very specific thing that I hope all of the folks here and within your communities you'll be aware of, which is the tenant protections that are going to be in place after the eviction moratorium is lifted on September 30th. So October 1 forward, it's going to be really important that once a landlord has the opportunity to evict a tenant again, that a tenant knows all of their rights and protections. And so I did print it out from the state's website, and I can leave it with anyone, or you can also find it. But things like how critical it's going to be that a tenant respond to an eviction and declare their financial stress related to the pandemic, and that they get to stay there in this proceeding. And so all the information you'll need is on the state's website, and I'll leave this here, but you might be the first person that a tenant reaches out to once they receive an eviction notice. And the most important thing they need to do is not self-evict, to not just leave the property and become unhoused. So that's going to be here. There's funding that's still going to be available. There's the landlord has to apply for assistance before evicting you. They have to demonstrate that they've applied for assistance before evicting a tenant. So all that's here, and I hope you'll keep this.
Hi, my name is Gretchen Flesher. I'm an architect. I've been here for many years.
Microphone higher.
I was the architect that did the senior housing here in Pacific Grove many years ago. And I talk about a NIMBYism issue. It was very extreme. It was very difficult. I think things have changed since then. I'm hoping they've changed. But there was so much opposition to building a low-income senior housing project that it was horrific. And I'm encouraged that what made it happen was that we had a very progressive and responsive mayor at the time who basically drove the project. If it hadn't have been for that, it wouldn't have happened. It was a private